You supplicate yourself to Donald Trump, not to the Constitution. Senator Cory Booker didn't whisper those words, didn't phrase them diplomatically, didn't couch them in senatorial courtesy. He shouted them directly at FBI Director Kash Patel on September 17, 2025, in a hearing room that had descended into chaos. Patel shouted back. Both men talked over each other. The chairman banged his gavel repeatedly, his voice barely audible over the confrontation. And somewhere in that shouting match was a serious question. Is America's FBI director loyal to the president or to the law? September 17, 2025, 3:42 p.m. Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room. The hearing had already been tense for hours. FBI Director Kash Patel had faced hostile questioning all day about the Charlie Kirk investigation, about FBI agent firings, about his aggressive social media presence. But nothing had escalated to actual confrontation. There had been pointed questions, defensive answers, occasional sparring, but always within the bounds of senatorial decorum. That was about to change. Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey had been watching the proceedings with visible frustration. A former mayor and prosecutor, Booker had built his Senate career on passionate advocacy mixed with legal precision. Today, the passion was about to overwhelm the precision. When Chairman Dick Durbin recognized him for questioning, Booker didn't ease into his topic. He went straight for the throat. Director Patel, I've sat here all day listening to your responses, and I have to tell you, I think what you're doing to the FBI represents a generational destruction of an American institution. His voice was already elevated, already carrying emotion that suggested this wasn't going to be a typical Q&A session. Patel's expression hardened immediately. He'd faced hostile senators before, but something in Booker's tone signaled this was different. Senator, I respectfully disagree. I'm not finished. Booker's voice rose sharply. During your confirmation hearing, you swore under oath that there would be no political retaliation against FBI employees. You looked senators in the eye and promised that every agent would be protected. Do you remember saying that? Senator, I stand by. Do you remember saying that? Booker was now shouting, his finger pointing across the room at Patel. The chamber went silent. Even senators who agreed with Booker looked uncomfortable with his volume and intensity. Yes, Senator, I remember, Patel replied, his own voice rising to match Booker's energy. Then explain to the American people why you fired over 40 senior FBI officials. Explain why nearly every terminated agent worked on investigations involving President Trump. Explain how that's not political retaliation. Booker's face was flushed, his voice echoing through the chamber with a raw anger that transcended typical political theater. Senator, those are false allegations. False! Booker grabbed a document from his desk. I have the names right here. Deputy Director Abate, 30 years of service, fired. Executive Assistant Director Moore, 25 years, fired. Special Agent in Charge Williams, supervised the Mar-a-Lago search, fired. How is that false, Director? Patel leaned forward toward his microphone, his own composure starting to crack. Senator, those personnel decisions were based on performance and organizational restructuring. Performance! Booker was now half standing, leaning over his desk. These are decorated agents with decades of exemplary service. The only thing they have in common is they all worked on cases involving Donald Trump. Chairman Durbin began banging his gavel. Senator Booker, please allow the witness to respond. But Booker wasn't stopping. Director Patel, let me ask you about the Charlie Kirk investigation. You tweeted that a subject was in custody before local police had even made an arrest. You gave the American people false information. You created panic and confusion. How is that protecting and serving? Patel's response came fast and hot. Senator, that was a rapidly evolving situation. It was incompetence, Booker shouted. Or worse, it was you trying to score political points on social media while a murder investigation was ongoing. Senator, that is a complete mischaracterization. Then why did you have to delete the tweet? Why did you have to issue a correction? Because you were wrong, Director. You prioritized your Twitter presence over factual accuracy. Patel's face was now red, his voice matching Booker's volume. Senator Booker, what you're engaging in right now is a rant of false information and political attacks. False information? Booker's voice reached a new pitch. Everything I've said is documented. The firings are documented. Your premature announcements are documented. Your social media attacks on FBI critics are documented. Senator, I'm not finished. Booker slammed his hand on the desk. You've turned the FBI into an extension of Donald Trump's political operation. You fire anyone who investigated him. You announce arrests before they happen to get media attention. You attack critics on Twitter like you're a political operative, not a law enforcement director. Chairman Durbin was now standing, gavel banging repeatedly. Senator Booker, you must allow the witness to respond. But the exchange had now devolved into both men shouting over each other simultaneously. Patel, Senator, if you would let me speak instead of grandstanding. Booker, grandstanding? I'm holding you accountable for assaulting the institutional integrity. Patel, that is absolutely false and you know it. Booker, you swore an oath to the Constitution, not to Donald Trump. Patel, Senator, this is completely inappropriate. Booker, what's inappropriate is what you've done to the FBI. The gavel banging became constant. Several senators were now calling for order. The official stenographer looked up from her machine, uncertain whether she could even capture the overlapping shouting. After nearly 30 seconds of chaos, Chairman Durbin's voice finally cut through. This hearing will come to order. Both men stopped shouting, though they continued staring at each other with undisguised hostility. After a brief pause to restore some semblance of decorum, Booker continued, his voice still elevated but more controlled. Director Patel, let me be very direct with you. I believe you have supplicated yourself to Donald Trump, not to the Constitution of the United States. The word supplicate, meaning to submit obediently to authority, landed like a slap. I believe you fire agents who investigated the president. I believe you make premature public announcements to please the president. I believe you use the FBI as a political weapon. And I genuinely believe, that you're not going to be around long because what you're doing is unsustainable. It was an extraordinary statement. A senator essentially predicting an FBI director's removal while directly accusing him of abandoning his oath. Patel's response was immediate and angry. Senator Booker, you are an embarrassment. What you just engaged in was a political rant with no basis in fact. You refuse to let me answer your questions because you're not interested in answers, you're interested in performing for cameras. The personal attack, calling a sitting senator an embarrassment, crossed a line that witnesses rarely cross. Several Republican senators looked uncomfortable. Booker's response was swift. Director, I asked you specific questions about specific firings, specific tweets, specific failures. If they're false, point out which ones. But you can't, because they're all true. And the fact that you respond with personal attacks instead of substantive answers tells us everything we need to know about your leadership. Patel leaned toward his microphone, his voice dripping with disdain. Senator, I tried to answer your questions, but you kept interrupting. Because you weren't answering them. You were giving me bureaucratic talking points instead of addressing the substance. It's my time as a witness to respond, Senator, not yours to lecture. The claim was legally dubious. Senators control their own questioning time, but it revealed Patel's frustration at being unable to complete his responses. Director, when you sit before this committee, it is our time, Senator. You answer to Congress. You answer to the American people. And right now, you're failing to provide any credible explanation for your actions. Booker pulled out another document, his hand slightly shaking. Whether from anger or adrenaline was unclear. Let me read you something from an internal FBI memo leaked to the press. This is from agents in your own bureau, Director. They say, and I quote, "Morale has never been lower. Senior leadership is being purged. Agents are afraid to work on politically sensitive cases. The FBI is becoming a political organization instead of a law enforcement agency." He looked up from the document. "That's from your agents, Director. Your FBI. How do you respond to that?" Patel's response came quickly, but with less volume than before. "Senator, anonymous leaks from disgruntled employees don't represent the views of the 35,000 men and women of the FBI who come to work every day committed to protecting Americans." "So you're saying this memo is fake? That the agents who wrote it are lying?" "I'm saying that selective leaks designed to undermine leadership don't reflect reality. Under my leadership, we've made record arrests in human trafficking, fentanyl interdiction, and violent crime." Booker leaned back slightly, his expression showing he recognized Patel was pivoting to safer ground. "Director, you keep citing statistics about arrests and operations, but I'm asking about institutional integrity. I'm asking about political independence. I'm asking whether the FBI serves the Constitution or serves Donald Trump." "The FBI serves the American people, Senator, and we do so without political bias, despite your insinuations." "Then why have you fired dozens of agents who investigated Trump? Why have you redirected resources away from domestic terrorism investigations, which is where threats are actually coming from, to focus on immigration enforcement?" It was a specific allegation, and Patel's response showed he was on less comfortable ground. "Senator, resource allocation is based on current threat assessments." "Director, the threat assessment shows rising domestic terrorism from far-right extremist groups. Your own intelligence briefings say that. Yet you've pulled agents off those cases to work immigration. That's not following threat assessments. That's following political priorities." Patel didn't have a ready answer for that. After a pause, he replied, "Senator, the FBI addresses multiple threats simultaneously. We haven't abandoned domestic terrorism investigations." "But you've reduced resources for them while increasing resources for immigration cases. That's a political choice, not a law enforcement choice." As Booker's time was running out, he delivered his closing statement with renewed intensity. "Director Patel, I came into this hearing hoping to hear you defend the FBI's independence, hoping to hear you commit to protecting agents from political retaliation, hoping to hear you acknowledge mistakes and commit to doing better." He paused, his voice dropping slightly, but still carrying clear disappointment. "Instead, I heard deflections, personal attacks, talking points. What I didn't hear was a commitment to the Constitution over political loyalty. And that's why I believe your tenure as FBI director will be short. Because the FBI cannot function as a political operation. It must function as a law enforcement agency. And until you understand that difference, you're failing the American people." Patel's final response came with barely controlled anger. "Senator, the American people are safer under this administration's leadership than they were under the previous administration. We've restored the FBI's focus to actual law enforcement instead of political investigations. And despite your rhetoric, I stand by every decision I've made. History will judge whether I served the Constitution or served politics. I'm confident in that judgment." Chairman Durbin, perhaps sensing that further exchange would only generate more heat than light, quickly moved to the next senator. But the damage to both men was done. Within minutes, clips of the shouting match were trending across social media. Conservative outlets framed it as Booker melts down in unhinged rant against FBI director. Liberal outlets framed it as Booker courageously confronts Patel over FBI politicization. But the reality visible in the full video told a more complicated story. Booker made specific, documented allegations, firings of agents who worked Trump cases, Charlie Kirk premature announcements, social media behavior, resource reallocation away from domestic terrorism. Patel responded with general denials without addressing specific allegations, then pivoted to personal attacks and talking points about arrest statistics. Both men shouted over each other, violating senatorial decorum and making the hearing room look more like a cable news debate than congressional oversight. The chairman lost control of the hearing for several minutes, a rare institutional failure that suggested how frayed political norms had become. Legal analysts noted that Booker's allegations were largely accurate and documented, but his delivery was so emotional that it risked undermining his credibility. Political strategists noted that Patel's refusal to directly address specific allegations suggested he couldn't deny them, but his aggressive counterattacks might play well with the Trump base. FBI agents watching the exchange reportedly had mixed reactions. Some appreciated Booker's defense of the Bureau's independence, others felt both men had turned the FBI into a political football rather than treating it as a law enforcement institution. Perhaps most tellingly, Republican Senator Thom Tillis, a Patel supporter, was caught on a hot mic during a break telling Patel, "Don't take the bait next time. You look bad when you shout back." The advice came too late. The shouting match had already become the viral moment of the hearing, overshadowing any substantive policy discussion. In the end, both men lost. Booker's legitimate questions about FBI politicization got buried under criticism of his emotional delivery. Patel's inability to directly address specific allegations was overshadowed by his willingness to fight back aggressively. And the American public watching at home saw two officials who seemed more interested in scoring political points than in actually addressing whether the FBI had been compromised by political pressure. Sometimes the most important question doesn't get answered because everyone's too busy shouting to listen.